This is Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and this week, Simon Phipps and I will be talking to Christine Peterson of the Foresight Institute about both the Foresight Institute and the origins of the term open source, which she thought up, and we would be calling the show full without it. So stay tuned for that. Floss Weekly is brought to you from LastPass Studios. Securing every access point in your company doesn't have to be a challenge. LastPass unifies access and authentication to make securing your employees simple and secure, even when they are working remotely. Check out lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly, episode 599, recorded Wednesday, October 7th, 2020. Foresight Institute. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Barracuda. Did you know that 91% of all cyber attacks start with an email? To uncover the threats hiding in your Office 365 account, get a secure and free email threat scan at barracuda.com/floss. And also by privacy.com. Privacy lets you make purchases online using virtual cards instead of real ones, protecting your identity and bank information on the internet. New customers get $5 to spend on their first purchase. Go to privacy.com/floss to sign up now. Hey everybody, welcome to Floss Weekly. I am Doc Searls, and I am joined this week by the great Simon Phipps. There, Simon?
I am still here, Doc.
You're still here.
I'm over here in Southampton again, in my lair at the edge of the woods. And today's there's a disturbance in the force. The Supreme Court has been discussing the Oracle v. Google case, and I don't really think we can discuss that today. But it's very apposite to the subject at hand.
Need to bring it up. That's very disturbing from what you were saying earlier, off camera and mic. But yeah, that's a bad one. So we'll line up something about that. But this week we're meeting with Christine Peterson, who, among other things, came up with the term open source, without which we would just be called full instead of floss. So are you familiar with her work, Simon?
Absolutely. So the open source movement had just had its 20th birthday, and that was an opportunity to go back and look at the origins of open source as a term and its connection with the expression free software, and to go further back in history than that and look at the origins of where the BSD and GPL based movements that became the free software movement and then the open source movement came from. So I've spent a lot of time researching this and talking to original sources. I spoke to Bruce Perrins quite a lot about that history, and to a number of other people. And the only person who I never actually got to get on the phone with was Christine Peterson. And so it's a great delight today to finally get to talk to Christine.
Fantastic. She wrote a great piece about that too. We should put in the notes. Okay, so we have to get going. And I need to tell you that this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Barracuda. Barracuda is the provider of cloud-based enterprise-grade security solutions that protect email, networks, data, and applications. Because suddenly you have dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of employees working remotely. Every one of them are getting tons of emails every day, making them vulnerable. 91% of all cyber attacks start in an email. Spear phishing, ransomware, account takeover, conversation hijacking. Multiply that by how many employees, how many emails. One click on the wrong email can cost you money, customers, and your reputation. Barracuda researchers have seen a steady increase in the number of coronavirus-related spear phishing attacks since January, and they've observed a recent spike of 667% in this type of attack since the end of February. So you get the protection you need for your company with Barracuda Total Email Protection. It includes all-in-one email security backup and archiving. AI-based protection from spear phishing, account takeover, and business email compromise. An automated incident response that gives you options to quickly and efficiently address attacks. Security awareness training to educate your workforce so your employees can be the first line of defense against attacks. And there's so many examples of email threats. We've seen many of them here at TWiT, and I invite you to look at as many as you can because it's going to save you a lot of work. There are ones, for example, impersonating the World Health Organization. Attackers utilize domain spoofing and promise information relating to the coronavirus in an attempt to trick users into a phishing scam. So ensure the safety and security of your business with Barracuda. To uncover the threats hiding in your inbox, get a secure, free email threat scan of your Office 365 account, risk-free at barracuda.com/floss. That's barracuda.com/floss. Barracuda, your journey secured. Okay, with thanks for that, I want to introduce Christine Peterson. Christine's with the Foresight Institute. She's been there for many years, but she's important to us, to our show, because she came up with the term open source in the first place. And we want to talk to her a bit about that. So welcome, Christine.
Hi, great to be here, Doc and Simon.
Yeah, this is great. So give us there's a lot to it, but the story of your role in rolling out this name that the whole world is now chanting in unison, not always meaning the same thing, but at least using it like it's part of the vocabulary. It's in the water now.
Yeah. So you guys remember those days. I mean, the term at that time we were all using was free software. And that term is fine for many uses. And in particular, it's fine for people who are very technical, who come out of the software community, who write code themselves. Because, of course, in English, the term free has two meanings. Free as in freedom, and free as in price. And to technical people, to people who can code, free software was free in both senses. So it was, in that sense, the perfect term. It was a great term. But of course, around the time we're looking at here, the late 90s, we were starting to try to move this paradigm out to be understood by a broader public. People who didn't code, people who did not understand what source code was. And then we ran into a very serious problem with the term. And many people were noticing this, that we were having increasing difficulties explaining to the average person, or even the average CEO who didn't come out of software, why this was a better model. And one of the blockages was that commercial entities were starting to try to sell services based on free software. And it was pretty darn confusing to customers to explain how this is free software and here's how you pay for it to these new companies. So it was a big problem. And I certainly wasn't the only one or even the main one who was concerned about it. Discussions were held about this and brainstorming sessions were held. What are we going to do about this? What's a better term?
Yeah, I know that the term open source was kicking around in the in military applications. Like, for example, if you look at Google's Ngrams in books, which looks at books like back to 1800, and there's a little tiny bit of trickle there going along for a long time, like as a phrase, but then it really vectored up in 98 after a decision was made, and you were involved in that decision, but it was kicked around before that. But suddenly it took off. do you want to give any particulars about how that got vetted and sort of agreed upon in the cabal as such as it was at the time?
Yeah, it's a pretty funny story, really. So there had been discussions at Foresight Institute, and I'm sure at other places, certainly at Netscape, I think, about this term. And I remember Eric Raymond was at Foresight for one of these, and I got he was there for a technical session, and happened to be talking with a couple people at Netscape, and I realized, okay, now's my chance to talk with these folks at Netscape. So when Eric got off the phone, I got on with two people at Netscape. One was a woman lawyer. I assume it must have been Mitchell Baker. I don't know who else that could have been. And I said, hey, you guys, we really need to change this name. It's holding us back. And they said, yep, it is holding us back, and we have to change it. But we didn't have any better ideas at the time. So, but we at least established, yes, this was a problem. And so this was really bugging me. I felt it was a big problem. And I would think about it casually, and we had some discussions at Foresight, and we just weren't getting anywhere with it. But, the way it works is, maybe you're in the shower or on a walk and something comes to mind. And so open source popped into my mind, and I thought, well, that's good enough. I didn't think, oh, that's a brilliant term. I thought, well, that'll do. That's better than what we have now. So I ran it by people at Foresight, and they liked it, except one PR guy who said, no, free is open. The term open is overused, which is true at the time, but I still thought, oh, it's good enough. So Eric Raymond was in town to go to various meetings to promote the free software model. And there was a meeting at one of the startup companies. And I wrote it up, and it's all established in my write-up, but Eric doesn't drive. And normally I wouldn't go to this meeting, but I thought, oh, he needs a ride. So I went to the meeting, sat in on it. And fortunately, I had pre-briefed another attendee, Todd Anderson, about this proposal for a new name. I hadn't mentioned it to Eric Raymond himself. And so we had the meeting, which was a general strategy meeting. It was not a terminology meeting at all. But I was silent because I am not a software developer. I don't write code. I don't write open source code. So I was there more as an observer rather than an active participant. But people there probably thought I was Eric Raymond's girlfriend, actually, is my suspicion. So fortunate. So I didn't feel like I could interrupt the meeting and say, hey, guys, the term for your whole effort is wrong. Use my term. And I couldn't do that. I had no standing with this group. So fortunately, though, Todd Anderson did have some standing. And he did a brilliant thing, really smart. He didn't make such an announcement either. He just casually threw it out there. He just used it in a sentence. He just started using it as a term. And no one noticed except me, of course. I noticed and looked at him like, whoa, okay. And about a minute or two later, someone else at the table started to use the term. And then Todd and I looked at each other like, yes, that's mimetic. That's a mimetic engineering effort, right? That's where you launch a meme and it takes off. So again, this meeting was not about terminology, but toward the end of the meeting, as I recall, there was a general, very brief discussion about the term saying, or maybe other terms were considered, but as I recall, there was a very casual general view of, yeah, that's good enough. Yeah, we'll go with that. It's a better term. And after that, there was a more formal meeting and a much larger meeting held by Tim O'Reilly and his team. much larger community meeting at which I was not present, which is appropriate, right? I'm not a developer. There's no particular reason for me to be there. And then they had a vote between open source and I believe sourceware, which I think might have been Michael Tieman's suggestion, which is also a perfectly good term and also would have been fine, I think. But apparently the term open source got more votes. So when you look at these, and after that, it was like an exponential term, exponential growth. At least that's how it felt to me. So when you look at these mimetic engineering efforts, what you want to do is you look at that exponential and you trace it back and you go, all right, where did this how did this happen? And this one clearly was Eric Raymond was the one who carried this forward into the world. So the interesting question is, well, where did Eric Raymond get it from? As far as I know, he got it from me, but there's no videos, there's no records. So anyway, the important thing is the industry took off for whatever reason, and we're all much better off for it.
Right. Now, interesting. Eric does say that he got it from you. I'm just reading his words up here. He said that he says at the end of an interview that I'm reading here that he's very careful to credit you with coining that usage in this context, and that you deserve the credit for coming up with it. So Eric has commented to that effect, and I also spoke to Bruce Perrins about this subject, and he also commented that it was you that pitched the idea into the meeting, and it was obviously a well accepted phrase because it became natural usage for people to have in conversation when they were talking about things. So you weren't aware that Eric and Bruce were both keen to credit you?
I did know that Eric did. I didn't know that Bruce did. And you recall those days. It was a very exciting time in this nascent industry, where basically a movement was turning into an industry. Super exciting time. And for those of us who were reading Slashdot at the time, it was just stunning to see how fast this model was. And the term were catching on. That's where I got my information. Every day I'd go on Slashdot and it would be, wow, another mention, another company is interested, another company is launching. Super exciting time.
Now, do you think that the term was one that you invented, or do you think it was one that condensed on your consciousness from elsewhere? The reason I ask is because I'm aware that in 1996, Caldera used the term in a press release, very much in the sense that we would use it today. And there are earlier examples on Usenet of people using the phrase. And I wonder whether you felt that it was something that you had completely coined from the void, or whether it could have been something that condensed into your understanding.
Well, what's interesting in these speculations, because we don't have records of how our brains work, so we have to try to figure it out. I didn't read Usenet and I didn't read free software publications. However, the term open source applying to just information in general goes way back in the intelligence community, which is the spy community, right? They use it to refer to things like newspapers and magazines and these kinds of open public sources of information. So even though I was completely, I wasn't connected at all to the free software technical literature in any way, maybe it came from the spy community. That's much more likely. In my own brain, it feels like, yeah.
So they were using it in regard to software as well. There's a Usenet post from 1987 where the NSA, because they use the term open source describing the source of intelligence being non-classified, but they also use the term in connection with some software they were working on as early as 1987 on Usenet. So it seems likely that...
That's very cool. I think that just shows like it's it's a clear term, and what's bizarre is why it didn't catch on earlier, right? I think the credit really, in terms of why did it catch on, is it goes to Eric Raymond. You guys must remember, I mean, he made a full-time career, like just working day and night for months or years promoting this model of software under whatever term you want to use. So in terms of, well, why did the term not catch on earlier? We really have to point more at Eric Raymond, at Tim O'Reilly. I mean, these people, and Bruce Perens, all these guys who worked so hard to help the transition happen. And people like Mitchell Baker and the folks at Netscape and Mozilla. So, that's where the credit really goes. Thinking of a term is not hard to do, right? Promoting the term and getting out there and explaining to people what it means and why it's important, that's really that's the important thing here.
Right. Yes. Well, I interviewed several of those people. So I did all this for the 20th, for OSI's 20th anniversary, where I was giving talks also all over the place about the origins of open source. And a lot of people speak of the work that Tim O'Reilly did in using the term very early on in high-profile marketing for O'Reilly Media, as it is now called. And then I think also what happened at Netscape and then at Mozilla had a big influence. Obviously, Eric and his usage and his tenacious fighting against Microsoft under the flag of open source had a big impact. So I do think it takes a village, as someone once said, to make these things happen. And having said that, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was whether you were aware of the pivotal point in tech history that you were at, because I've been in that place as well with Java and with XML, and at the time I can't say that I felt that I was changing the world, and yet I look back 5 years at what we did at IBM in 1995 around Java, and I think to myself, well, that was transformational for IBM and maybe for the industry. Did you feel at the time that what you were doing was a transformational act, or was it just some more geeky meetings?
It felt important to me at the time, partly because it had been, even though I'm not a software professional, it had been explained very clearly to me why the open source model was important, why it was critical to society, why it was important to our future. So I felt intensely that it was important to help this transition happen as fast as possible and to get the communications right. And as I said, if you were reading Slashdot at the time, it was very clear this was some kind of exponential going on. So, I didn't feel like it was like I was doing it. Clearly, I wasn't doing it myself. It was much more the community, as you said, people like Eric Raymond, Tim O'Reilly, Bruce Perens, and these folks who were out there on the front lines. But they were being very successful, I felt. And I was judging mainly by media coverage in which the term open source was showing up. And it was tremendously fast on the uptake. At least that's how it felt to me. It felt very fast. It felt very good. So I could tell, it definitely felt like a big change happening fast, and that, I wasn't at the center of it, but I did my little bit.
This is a really deep vein to mine, and I also want to get into what you're doing with Foresight and perhaps even the connection between the two. And so let's pivot to that after I also tell you this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by privacy.com. You don't use the same password everywhere, so why use the same card number when you shop online? Privacy.com gives you a brand new virtual Visa or MasterCard number for every purchase you make online. Download their browser extension from the Chrome Web Store or their Android iOS app and link your virtual cards to your U.S. checking account or debit card. Privacy lets you take control of your finances. Set up a spending limit, control your subscriptions and recurring payments. Never worry about forgetting to cancel your subscriptions or free trials. Again, make sure you are never accidentally billed twice or upgraded without your consent. With their card sharing feature, you can easily and safely send someone a privacy card straight from your dashboard in just a few clicks. It's currently for desktop only, but stay tuned. No more copying, pasting, or screenshots. Your recipient won't need a privacy account to access the shared card. Just click on the share button when viewing a card, enter an email address to share to, and privacy will handle the rest. For security, you can feel safe about making purchases anywhere online. Privacy is PCI-DSS compliant and held to the same security standards as your bank. Sensitive information is secured using military-grade encryption. That means your information is encrypted using split-key encryption with partial keys held by separate employees. No single person can access the sensitive information on the server because it requires multiple keys to decrypt. Privacy does not sell your data. Your information is always safe with them. With their free personal plan, create up to 12 cards a month, secure merchant locked and single use, or choose between their paid versions, Pro and Teams, where you receive 1% cash back and additional security features. Recently, Privacy also launched their card issuing API, which was built specifically for developers and small business owners who are looking to create cards at scale. If these plans sound like they could be a good fit for you, check out Privacy today. Head to privacy.com/floss and sign up for an account. As a special treat for our viewers, new customers will automatically get $5 to spend on their first purchase for a limited time only. Yes, that's free money. Go to privacy.com/floss and sign up now. Okay, so Christine, you were at the Foresight Institute at the time, and you're still there, and there must be connections there, and I'd like to hear more about Foresight in any case. So fill us in on that transition.
Sure. So Foresight is a nonprofit organization with the goal of steering new and emerging technologies in directions. So we look at coming technologies such as nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, include areas of the internet, including smart contracts. And we try to say, all right, how can these technologies be used for positive purposes? How can they be used potentially for negative purposes? Is there any way to reduce the chances of a negative application and push toward a positive application? So you can see this general approach can be used anywhere, and we do. Software, hardware, and biology. We look at longevity topics. And so our mandate is very broad, which has enabled us to play in a lot of different spaces and try to put together a really coherent effort in making future technologies be positive for humanity and the biosphere. So super broad mandate and lots of fun.
I'm wondering what you may have looked at back, toward the beginning that you saw coming and came true. I mean, either examples of that or what how you might have wanted to influence the vector that those future trends might have taken. It's kind of a broad question, but I'm just wondering how that plays.
I'll do one example, which is if you go back to our founding inspirational book, which was the book Engines of Creation by the Foresight co-founder, Eric Drexler. It covered a lot of these topics, nanotech, AI, longevity. It also covered hypertext, which was the term we were using before the web came about, right? This is even before internet. And the model of hypertext we were looking at and promoting at the time included micropayments. And I would have said, Unfortunately, the model that caught on did not include micropayments. And that was because people really like things that are free, of course. But now, if you look at what's going wrong with the internet today, you can see, wow, this model of apparent freedom, it looks like the stuff is free. It turns out, no, it's not really free. We're paying with loss of privacy. All our personal data is being sold. We're not the customers, we're the product, right? That's what has happened. And looking back, I would say, wow, if only we had been successful at pushing through that micropayments model. And is it too late? Could we still improve the situation a lot by putting in a micropayments model so that content creators can be compensated directly through tiny little bit of tiny payments from each person? I wonder if it's worth looking at that again and saying, hey, we screwed it up. Is there a way to fix this?
Well, speaking personally, I'd say yes. I don't think anything is off the table. One of the things that one of the things I say is that the older I get, the earlier it seems. I mean, we've been in the digital world for a few decades, probably in the current digital world really only since the arrival of the smartphone. And those things, get replaced every 18 months on average, something like that. And I think it's really early. In fact, I was involved in an earlier conversation today on whether or not, all of the stuff you just mentioned that all of us are complaining about, I've written probably too much about our loss of privacy, is all part of client server. We're kind of stuck in the client server world of browsers and servers where we're always going to be subordinate. And but what happens if we look back on this time remember when everybody was on browsers and the internet was this, was run by, several large companies, more or less, or seemed to be run by those several large companies. And before we had this other invention, and that one might have micropayments in it. I don't think that's off the table at all. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that. Then I have another thought about longevity. So
I would agree. I don't think it's too late. If you've been around for a while, I know Doc and Simon and you guys have and I have, we've seen things change a lot already, right? Remember when IBM was the big enemy and then Microsoft was the big enemy, but now they're not the big enemy anymore. So paradigms change and this could potentially change again. And so I'd like to throw that out there and say, hey, let's think about is it possible to fix the problems, some of the problems we're in with social media, with the particular giants we have now. Can we fix it with micropayments? So let's hear your point about longevity, Doc.
Well, so I know you're talking about human longevity there. I think that's what Foresight was, one of the things it was focused on. But actually, you and I were just talking yesterday about the longevity, digital longevity. I mean, there's most of us who've been around for a while have lots of digital goods written on media that are on their way out or have already gone. And on top of that, we're putting all of our stuff in the cloud, which is all rented. You can put your entire life's work in the cloud, and if you don't have it backed up locally or in some form that is durable, as soon as you stop paying rent, it's gone. It's not. One of the metaphors I've heard often lately is that the internet is a whiteboard. It's not a library. It's a whiteboard, and it can be anybody can come in and erase that thing or parts of that thing. So I'm wondering if you or Foresight have given any thought or work toward the digital side of longevity and how we make things persist in the world that are sort of the published parts of our lives online.
We haven't taken that one on, and I think part of the reason we haven't is I think the Long Now Foundation may be doing fairly well on that. So, and the space of problems we're trying to solve is so huge. If another group is on it, Foresight tends to say, okay, somebody else is on this one. We'll go pioneer something else. So I think it would be great fun to have someone on from Long Now and say, how are you guys fixing the problem?
So Simon actually has a question from listeners. We have live listeners. So do you want to throw that one in there, Simon?
Yes, I was just looking in the chat room, and it's actually a question that I've heard from other folks that's asking whether open source, as we conceived it at the start of the millennium, is actually a concept and a philosophical program that is mainly embraced by people of a certain generation, and whether the once we see Gen X and dare I say boomers move on into the great nursing home in the sky, whether open source will still be relevant. Do you have a view on that in the long perspective on technology, Christy?
Oh, great question. And it's kind of a surprising question to me. I certainly haven't heard that suggested before, that it's a temporary model. I would be very surprised if it were to disappear. I mean, I think there are deep fundamental reasons why at least certain types of software, I would even extend that more broadly to certain types of technology levels, perhaps we can say, that are more naturally shared in public. And then, as we've seen, just because there's the open source model doesn't mean proprietary software goes away, and not at all. So it seems to me like there's a natural ecosystem for both of these models, and I would be very surprised if either one goes away. I think there's, we all know what the benefits are. There's a long list of benefits for doing certain things in an open source way, and those benefits aren't going to go away. So that's kind of like saying, well, is the alphabet going to become proprietary? No, I mean, there's a reason why the alphabet is public domain. So no, I would be very surprised. I really don't think it's a generational thing at all.
Right. So I don't know if you've been watching what's been going on with companies like MongoDB and Elastic, who have been looking at the open source model and saying, yeah, that's all very well, but really we want developers to be able to do what they want without needing to get any clarification, as long as they don't work for Amazon. And they've been suggesting that the open source model comes from a simpler time, when there were no super large predators exploiting the work of others to create proprietary wealth. Have you seen those changes? And do you think there is anything to the suggestion that open source is oversimplistic libertarianism that needs to grow up in the modern economy?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me at all if models need to evolve into in multiple directions, right? There's reason to think that we have come with the very best software licenses, or that the licenses that were come up with 10 or 20 years ago will be the ones that are perfect for 10 or 20 years from now. So rather than say that it's out of date, I would say no. I mean, this is an evolving living space, and I would expect to see licenses evolve. And the way we're going to find out which ones are best is through competition, right, between licenses. So yeah, I would encourage experimentation with licenses. I'm not religious about particular ones, sure. But some of the fundamental principles I hope will continue, regardless of how we evolve the licenses. There are certain principles underlying them that I think are fundamentally important. But again, not all software is going to be open source, right? We're going to have proprietary software. And these things interact in complex ways, and it's very hard to predict. But I wouldn't be dogmatic about a particular license from 10 years ago, for sure. There's room for creativity here.
Right. So the other dimension of this that's been coming up has been, so I'm wearing a T-shirt that the people listening on radio can't see, says "Make Orwell Fiction Again." And one of the problems that we've been seeing coming out in the open source community has been a concern about government agencies with a controversial moral compass using open source technologies as the basis of their actions. And there's been this strong movement to come up with ways of licensing open source software so that the Department of Homeland Security, and particularly ICE, can't use it, and so that it can't be used to take action against marginalized groups. And this seems kind of ironic to people like me. I suspect to you as well. I think you're of the cypherpunk generation as well. Do you have a view about whether this is a valid line of approach, or whether people are using the wrong weapon to fend off the animal in this case?
Well, okay. So this ties in with the question Doc sent me earlier before the show about do I have anything to say about blockchain? And it ties in as follows. The assumptions of the folks who are those concerns that you're describing, of course, they're real concerns. Nobody would deny, I hope, that these are concerns. But there's something a little naive going on there, I think, in the sense that it's assuming that the Department of Homeland Security is our biggest problem, or is the entity most likely to cause us big problems by misusing technology. And when it's phrased that way, I hope it's clear that I don't see it that way. We have much bigger issues to deal with. And so I guess what I would say is, I'm not denying the concern. I would say let's step it up to the broader concerns about what's happening in the world internationally as well. And then I think we see, okay, we have bigger worries than that particular worry. I'm not denying it. I'm just saying we have bigger concerns. So we can talk about the blockchain thing now or later, but we have to, rather than, we tend to be in the United States, we tend to be very US focused, excessively UX focused. And I think we need to kind of put that aside and say, hey, what's happening in the broader world here? And how does open source play into that, which is an even more complex question.
Boy, there's so many ways we can go with this, and we don't have that much time left. So, I guess as Simon mentioned earlier, the cypherpunks, and actually you shared with me, there's a Reason Magazine is putting out a documentary. It's on YouTube, a 4-part documentary on the cypherpunks, and we were both around them. We both knew Phil Salen and his Amex project. His fealty to Hayek and a sort of libertarian. I wouldn't call him arch or hyper libertarian, but there was a libertarian sensibility behind the cypherpunk movement. I knew Eric Hughes there pretty well, Whit Diffie a bit. And my point with it, though, is that once an idea is in the water, it doesn't come out again. It's kind of like if you imagine Earth 2 billion years ago and somebody coming in and saying, do you think this life thing is going to work out? And yeah, it not only works out, it gets more and more complicated, and species may go away, but ways of living do not, and ways of using oxygen do not. And having had a role in a couple of memes in the world, Markets Are Conversations is one, and Clue Train is another, and open source too. I was one of the promulgators of open source. The events you were talking about earlier were when Eric Raymond stayed at my house, and I was his part-time taxi driver and talked to him about that stuff when it was going down. I think these things just kind of roll along. So where I'd like to go in the time we have left is a little bit toward if you're comfortable with it, what are the big things that you and your colleagues at Foresight are looking at now, especially on that international scope? I mean, there's the internet in some ways in its use is breaking up a little bit between the kind of hyper-privacy regulated Europe, the surveillance-oriented Far East and the sort of wild and woolly U.S., but where regulations coming in here, say in California, which my inner cypherpunk libertarian is saying, please don't put regulation ahead of tech because it's going to screw things up. So I'm wondering if when you put your macroscope on, what do you see coming?
Okay, this is great. I can do three things together. One is answer that question, talk about what Foresight is doing, and wrap up on the blockchain thing. They're all one thing. So this is great. If you look into what's coming, and we do that all the time at Foresight, there's a book in progress being co-authored by Allison Duteman, the Foresight incoming president, Mark Miller, one of our senior fellows, and myself, looking at the future of artificial intelligence, software, smart contracts, computer security, all these issues. And these are central to our future. So three things that I can give an example. And we had been saying, Doc, all right, what about blockchain? Do I have anything to say? And I wanted to talk about and slightly disagree with the comments made by Brian Behlendorf on this show a few weeks ago regarding the DAO attack and the forking of the Ethereum code. So how do these things connect? So when this attack happened, it was a security-related attack. There was $100 million at stake, and so the code was forked to deal with that. And Brian was basically saying, yeah, they did the right thing. This has to fit into the more general framework of law. And I have tremendous respect for Brian, and he's super brilliant, of course, and highly technical, and I am not. However, I will, in this one case, I will go ahead and disagree because I want to at least throw out three reasons why perhaps that was not the way to go. The first one's very abstract, the second one's a little more concrete, and the third one's very concrete. So the first one, this whole idea that that there could be value in having some kind of space in the world where it is possible to write a contract that plays out as written without having external human factors come in and disrupt the contract. It's a new thing. It's a new thing in the world. It's a new thing, as far as we know, in the universe. It's a new space to explore. And we had that opportunity, and we said, no, thanks. So that's a pretty abstract argument, but I think it's interesting. The second one, a little easier to grasp, is just to say, well, you've got, the blockchain space or smart contract space, and you've got the rule of law, human law, right? And so Brian is basically saying, well, you always want human law to be able to dominate over blockchain space and to be able to correct errors made there. But there's a potential flaw here, which is assuming that this upper level is some kind of democratic system. But if you look at the world today, look at the superpowers and say, well, which system is growing faster economically, the democratic powers or the authoritarian power? And the answer is no, it's the authoritarian power. They're the ones that are growing economically, and with economic power comes military power. So potentially this upper level is not what we're picturing right now, right? It could be something really negative, right? So having something down here that actually works that can potentially compete with this upper level, which has somehow gone bad, could be super valuable in the future. So that's my second argument. The third one is much more concrete, which is, look, what happened there was a computer security flaw. So the folks who made those investments did not do their due diligence in terms of making that investment, which we all know, if you're going to make serious investments, you have to do due diligence. You have to dig in and find out, well, what exactly is going to happen with this money? And these folks, and I probably know some of them, and I'm apologize for saying this, but you guys didn't do your homework, right? So we have the opportunity there for only the low sum of $100 million to teach the whole world a super important lesson in computer security, which is vital to our future. And we didn't do it. Instead, we sent a terrible message saying, oh, you don't need to worry about computer security. If there's a computer security problem, the system will bail you out. Just like the message, to make an analogy in the financial system, we've sent messages to financial institutions, to the banks, saying it doesn't matter if you make bad loans. We will bail you out, and we'll do it again and again and again. And so now we have banks that are too big to fail, and we have no choice anymore. We have to bail them out. So you can tell I'm passionate about this. Computer security, $100 million is a very small price to pay to teach the world a lesson saying computer security is important. It's vital. It's vital, and if you look into the future, including maybe even today, computer security is vital to our physical existence, right? Our physical existence is increasingly based on systems that are run by computers, and that software is generally insecure. It's terribly insecure. Even things like our electrical grid, on which our society depends completely, is not, in my impression, is not secure. So when are we going to start learning this lesson? That was an opportunity, and we blew it. So just throwing that out there, we're going to see this again. Let's think harder next time about the lessons we're sending. I think the Ethereum system might have actually been stronger if they had let that fail, because it deserved to fail. So that's maybe not a welcome view, but that's my view.
That is that's a fabulous way to summarize this, and to tee up future shows. I was thinking that we should actually have like a panel show or something like that with you on it, or you and other people from Foresight to debate this. I mean, maybe bring Brian in. I don't know, but I mean, I just think it's really great that. And I love hearing your passion on this thing too, it really tees up an awful lot of thinking. We're going back and forth in the back channel here too, and it's probably the audience is worked up, and that's exactly what we want. So, but we're coming into the end of an hour here, so we just have a few summary questions. The first one is usually about blockchain, so we already covered that one. And you made a point earlier, I think, that you're not a programmer, so these next two may or may not have be important to you. But actually, there's one. Are there any questions we haven't asked that you could answer quickly and in a kind of summary form that we could go on to the last two?
You and I could go on for hours. No,
I know we could.
Let's try to wrap it up.
Yeah, I was thinking we just need to talk on the phone later anyway. Okay, so the last two questions really are what is your, and these are our control questions. What is your favorite text editor and scripting language?
Right. So I'm going to answer that assuming that we're talking about the English language, because that's the language I use. And I think this is useful actually to anyone, including software folks. So let's say you want to write a very long document in English, right? Maybe you want to write a book of some kind. How do you write a document that long in English There's a couple ways to come at it. One is if you're good at getting your ideas down in writing, and one is if you think you can't write in English at all, okay? So if you think you can write somewhat in English, what I find is if you need to do truly creative work, start with pencil and paper. Don't even go on the keyboard, and just get the basics down on a piece of paper. And then eventually what I end up doing, whether my words are on paper in handwriting, or if I have put them into the computer, now you have a very large number of ideas which are out of order. They're always out of order, okay? It's very hard to get them in order. So, and there is no computer screen big enough to see them all. It doesn't, I've never seen one. It has to be, many feet by many feet. There may be screens out there, but they're very expensive. So what I end up doing is I print everything out. I cut it up into little pieces with scissors. I lay it out on the living room floor. I move it around in different orders until it's in the right order, which is very hard. And then I tape them all together, and then I cut and paste them so that they're in the right order on the computer. It's very primitive, but I have not found any other way to do it. It's just too much information for there is no way to get it in your visual field any other way, and it has to be all in your visual field. So that's if you can write on the computer. If you can't, what you do is you record it verbally, and you have people ask you questions. Everyone watching this can answer questions, right? You can do that. So what you do is you have someone asks you questions, and you answer them verbally. And of course, with today's technology, it all gets transcribed. And then once you get the raw material verbally, then and technology puts it into text, then you can put it in order using the first way. So it sounds very primitive, but until we get screens that are as many feet by many feet, this is what we've got. And it does work. And if you think you can't write a book, I would say you probably can write a book. Just get somebody to ask you a lot of questions in your area, and eventually you will have a book's worth of content.
That's fantastic. And that is completely different than every other answer you've ever had. And I what I want to do is have somebody transcribe what you just said and use as an example of that kind of work. And I was also thinking that the great John McPhee had a whole piece in the New Yorker about how he uses ancient software on like DOS that nobody else in the world uses that's custom to do the amazing writing that he does. It's everybody to their own tools. Anyway, this has been fantastic. It's been a really great show. So thank you so much, Christine, for being with us, and we will have to have you back as soon as we can. Yeah, this has been so fun. Thank you, Doc and Simon. So Simon, how that this is more on the back channel than usual, and it's just been really interesting. How'd that go for you?
That was all good. It was great to finally speak with Christine, because it's been a while, and I've spoken to pretty much everybody else who was involved in popularizing the term open source. So, delight, and it will be good to dig into more of those things. I think there are some big questions to dig into there, because a lot of this world of cryptocurrency and of open source and of software freedom arose from a sensibility that regards freedom of speech as the prime directive. And I think that we're running into a society now where freedom of speech is being used as a weapon to take away people's liberty. And I think we, at some point, are going to have a big conversation about that, maybe here. And so I think we saw just the edge of that in what we were discussing with Christine, which is fascinating.
So I found myself thinking, and that there are some conversations I'd like to have here. We generally do the interview type show like this one, but I want to go to an idea we were talking about in the back channel, because it's really important that this. I had not even realized we were at this point with Oracle versus Google, where there's a real risk that the Supreme Court, especially the part of the Supreme Court that wants to propertize everything and thinks that everything should be, somebody's property, may invalidate or hamstring open source itself. And I think there's just I'd like to, offline, wherever we can, have a conversation about that, because it's in play right now, right? It's in play in front of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, Christine.
I'd
love to hear what you've got to say about it, because I've talked about it with lots of folks, and most of the lawyers I know are not very worried because they don't regard the Federal Circuit as precedent setting for this particular kind of case. They think that this case is just anomalous, and we have to wait for another case to come up that doesn't have patents associated with it, that's going to knock the cue ball over into the Federal Circuit. All my tech friends are all, smoking more weed and drinking out of larger bottles in fear that this is going to allow Oracle to do its great Satan job of destroying the open source movement. So, what do you think, Christine? I'm fascinated by that. This is the trailer for the panel.
Right. So, I think a friend of mine once asked. There was a software dispute going on in Florida in the courts. And a friend of mine was on one side and asked me to come to Florida to be an expert witness on open source. And I said, no, you're confused. You don't want me. You want Eric Raymond or someone like that. And he explained in more detail to me that the judge in that case was having trouble understanding, was expected to have a lot of trouble to understand what open source meant, what it even was. And I realized, and he said, and my friend explained, no, my lawyers on my side say they want someone who can explain it in like first grade terms. And I said, oh, then yes, you've got the right person. I think I can do that. So that's what we need to do with judges and juries or whoever at any level. Whenever you're dealing with people who are non-technical, you need someone who can explain to them, no, this is like the alphabet. You do not want to commercialize the alphabet. You can see why that would be a bad thing. And you can see why having a non-technical person is helpful, because if you explain it to them in software terms, they're not going to get it at all. But if you say something that simple, they might understand why it's such a very bad idea to make all software proprietary.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had the privilege of doing that because I was a material witness in the Oracle Google case, because I was chief open source officer at Sun when we open sourced Java, and so I did have the opportunity of explaining that to the Ninth Circuit court, and they seemed to understand. The challenge was then with the Federal Circuit, who seemed to have a vested interest in not understanding. And I think we're faced with a big challenge here.
We need your sensible British baritone on the case, which is I wouldn't disagree with anything you say in that voice. It's the sky is red. Yeah, it looks like it. You're right. It is.
Yeah. Well, I think it was in California a week or so back, wasn't it?
It was actually. I was trying to think of a color that's not that it would not be. But anyway, so this has been great. I know that Christine has a heart out, and we have to work on our post production here. So,
hey, can somebody save the chat for me? I'd love to read it.
Yeah, we will.
I hope I don't get too upset.
So thanks everybody. Yeah, I'll make a point of that. So thanks everybody. This has been Floss Weekly. We'll have somebody interesting on next week. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I guarantee it. It is every week. So thanks so much for being with us. Thank you, Simon and Christine, and we'll see you next week.
Want more TWiT? Well, check out Smart Tech Today. It's at twit.tv/STT. It's the show where Matthew Casanelli and I cover everything there is to know about smart tech, it's automation, it's connected devices, it's smart home, it's all those goodies and so much more. We get the news, we get the latest devices, we do reviews, everything. You got to check it out, twit.tv/STT for Smart Tech Today.